now live to the House floor on C-SPAN. Waiting for the U.S. House to gavel in, some short speeches to start things off. Dennis Kucinich set to speak about Libya at about 12:30 or so. This morning, Secretary Gates and Admiral Michael Mullen testified before the House Armed Services Committee. This afternoon, they'll be before the Senate Armed Services Committee. That's at 2:15 Eastern. We'll have that on C-SPAN 3. The legislative business today in the U.S. House is the FAA authorization bill. Lots of debate on that throughout the afternoon. Live coverage here on C-SPAN.
House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our guest chaplain, the Reverend Charles Jackson, Sr., Brooklyn Baptist Church, West Columbia, South Carolina.
Let us pray. Eternal God, our Heavenly Father, to whom the earth belongs, the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein, we humbly approach your throne of grace with hearts filled with gratitude and spirits given to praise. How thankful we are to you for your unconditional love and how you have demonstrated your love with compassion, care, and concern for all mankind. Thank you for our president, senators, congresspersons, and all other officials of our nation. Be pleased, dear Lord, to favor them with good health and strength, wisdom, and spiritual resources to lead our country in a manner that is pleasing and acceptable in your sight. We pray that you will keep our great nation under your holy protection. May we govern with the spirit of the prophet Micah, who said, to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with you. 'Tis your servant's prayer, in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen.
The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 15 one-minute requests on each side. Without objection, the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson, is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's an honor today, one of the greatest honors I've had in Congress, to welcome Pastor Charles Jackson, Sr. of Brooklyn Baptist Church, West Columbia, Lexington County, South Carolina. Pastor Jackson is a longtime family friend of our whole family. He actually began preaching at age 9. He was actually licensed at age 10. He was ordained at age 12. He became pastor of the church at age 18. And now he is the longest serving pastor in the Midlands of South Carolina, 40 years of service. He has built a church from nearly 60 members to 7,819 members, and we're so grateful for his success. In fact, 2 of his members are active members and serve in the district office of the 2nd District of South Carolina. Earl Brown, a former deacon of the church, is our deputy director, and special assistant is Beverly Colley. So we truly identify. There are now 65 ministries in this church. The sanctuary, 2,300 seating. He provides a credit union, a banquet facility, a foundation. It really serves the people of the Midlands of South Carolina, and I know that I'm grateful to be here with my colleague, Congressman Jim Clyburn, who also knows of what an extraordinary person Pastor Jackson is. He is also a successful family man. His wife, Robin, is here as First Lady of the Church. She is a beloved person in our community. Additionally, their son, Charles, is the pastor of the new Laurel Street Baptist Church, and we're very grateful. His daughter, Candace, is a graduate of Duke Law School and is a member of one of the most prominent law firms of South Carolina, Nelson Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough. And so also 4 grandchildren with Kayla and Charles III, Caleb, and Carter. And so it's my honor to be here with Pastor Charles Jackson and thank him for giving our prayer today.
What purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise? Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to take just a moment to associate myself with the remarks we just heard from Congressman Joe Wilson and to welcome my longtime friend, Reverend Charles Jackson, who, when we meet in the barbershop, I usually call him a little something different. I want to thank him so much for giving us the invocation here today. and let him know how much I appreciate his long friendship and that of his family as well. I look forward to seeing you at Tolliver's in a couple of days. Thank you, sir.
The chair will entertain up to 15 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection. The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, foreign invaders are threatening the people who feed America. Recently, I was invited to the Arizona border by Congresswoman Gabby Gifford's office. I met with border ranchers who live in fear each day because they don't know who or what is lurking on their land. They communicate with each other over radios. In this remote area, many times cell phones do not work. So today I'm filing legislation that is the idea of Ms. Gifford's. This bill is in memory of Robert Krentz, who, the Arizona rancher, was murdered by an illegal on his own property 1 year ago. Mr. Krentz is a former rancher whose family still lives in Arizona. News reports indicate Mr. Krentz was in a cell phone dead zone when he was murdered, and this bill will provide people in remote areas on the dangerous border area with cell phone service to call for help. If the federal government is going to refuse to protect the citizens, at least it can do is allow people the resources to protect themselves. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Of what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. President Obama yesterday outlined 4 areas to curb foreign oil dependence: domestic production, natural gas vehicles, car fuel efficiency, and better use of biofuels. He could have added a 5th element: his administration's own Sustainable Communities Partnership between EPA, the Department of Transportation, and HUD that has helped communities large and small provide families transportation and housing choices which conserve oil without sacrificing economic growth. This combination of smart transportation alternatives, land use, and design keeps communities resilient and reduces the impact of high gas prices. With only 2% of the world's oil reserves, America will never drill its way to energy independence as long as we continue to consume 20% of the world's oil. The only real way to gain independence from oil price shocks is to give families independence from oil.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Mr. Speaker, I request permission to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are many heroes from Colorado who have fought and continue to fight the global war on terror. Today I pay a tribute to one hero in particular, Marine Lance Corporal Christopher Steele Mice. Lance Corporal Mice of Bennett, Colorado, enlisted in the Marine Corps following his graduation from Bennett High School. He was deployed on January 2011 to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom and served with his brothers in 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines at the tip of the spear in Helmand Province. On March 17th, his unit came under fire, and he gave his life fighting the Taliban. Steele comes from a family with a long tradition of military service to our nation. He was proud to be an American, and from an early age he wanted to serve his country as a Marine. He chose to become a Marine because, in his words, they are the best. He had the reputation of a stand-up guy who loved his family and his country. Like a good Marine, he was also known to be the man up front, the man leading the way. Lance Corporal Christopher Steele Mice is a shining example of the United States Marine Corps service and sacrifice. As a Marine Corps combat veteran, my deepest sympathies go out to his family, his fellow Marines, and to all who knew him. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Article 1, Section 7.2 of the Constitution says that both houses, the House and the Senate, must pass a bill identical, and the President must sign it before it becomes a law. Now, wait. The Republicans have a bill. We're going to take it up tomorrow. H.R. 1255, that deems that a bill that only has passed the House of Representatives, H.R. 1, has become law. Now, what happened to the fact that we were going to have to prove the constitutionality of every bill that came before the House? This blatantly violates the Constitution. Now, I was totally outraged when I saw this. But then I realized, guess what? What's tomorrow? April Fool's Day. Hey, guys, you got me. Congratulations. Happy April Fool's Day. What are we really going to be doing tomorrow?
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from West Virginia rise?
Address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate the George Washington Patriots for winning the West Virginia Class AAA Boys Basketball Championship. The third-seeded Patriots defeated top-seeded Wheeling Park 55-54 to take home the state title. This was a special win for Coach Rick Green, as he was part of the team that gave the school their first basketball championship 40 years ago. In a close, intense game, the two teams battled to the end, but in the final seconds, George Washington was leading 55-52 when Wheeling Park looked what looked to be a three-pointer. However, a review of the shot showed that it was only a two-pointer, and George Washington won. Quite a finish. Having two boys who grew up playing basketball in West Virginia for Coach Green, I have seen both the faces of elation and anguish. A game as competitive and well-fought as this shows the heart and dedication of the young men and their coaches as they put in all season to get to this game. I want to congratulate both teams for tremendous seasons and for giving us such a memorable game. Congrats to G-Dub.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Coach Bob Hurley of Jersey City, New Jersey. Some may know Coach Hurley as the third high school career basketball coach to be inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Some may know that despite limited resources and no gym facilities, St. Anthony's High School in Jersey City, New Jersey, he recently led St. Anthony's high school basketball team to their 24th state championship and their 4th national title, and has led the team to over 1,000 wins. However, the more important number are those that show the impact he has had on his players. In his nearly 40-year career, only 2 of his players have not attended college. And of those graduates, over 200 young men have continued to play basketball, and 150 have received college scholarships. Coach Hurley sees the potential in his players, and even when they don't see it themselves. He is an inspiration to young men and a true role model and a father figure to many. I congratulate Coach Hurley, his players, St. Anthony's High School on their recent national title, which wish them well and success in the future. And I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I stand to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this week the House will consider the fate of crucial funding for commercial flights to and from airports in Morgantown, Clarksburg, and Parkersburg in my home state of West Virginia. West Virginia is a rural state without major population centers, and its employers need and deserve an adequate transportation infrastructure. Access to air transportation is essential to achieving economic growth. The I-79 corridor, for instance, has a large presence of federal, defense, and high-tech workers, in part because of daily flights to and from Washington, D.C. North Central West Virginia Airport and Bridgeport accounted for 2,372 jobs and $395 million in economic impact in 2008. Cutting spending is necessary to bring down the deficit and creating certainty for job creators. But our local airports are part of what provides certainty for area businesses. Let's make this airport funding program more efficient by throwing out what's wasteful but keeping what works. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize an amazing woman. A woman from the city of Anaheim in my district, Mrs. Maria T. Solis Martinez, in honor of Women's History Month. Miss Solis Martinez is a retired United States Air Force Master Sergeant who served during the Vietnam era from 1960 to 1967. In 1974, she joined the California Air National Guard and continued her commitment to serving our country in the 261st and the 222nd Combat Communications Squadron. I'm truly proud to have such an extraordinary woman in my hometown, and she is a mentor and a friend, and she's always working for the community. For over 10 years, she has been an active member sponsor of the Latino Advocates for Education Incorporated, an organization that brings awareness and recognition to the contributions of Latino military veterans in all the wars fought by the United States. She continues to devote endless hours in volunteering with Girl Scouts of Orange County, North Orange County YWCA Youth Employment Service, and so many other organizations, MANA, mentoring young girls to become talented, distinguished women. As we honor Women's History Month and Women in the Military History Week, I proudly recognize Mrs. Maria Solis Martinez for her incredible leadership and for being such a great role model. And I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Delaware rise?
Seek permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to object once again to the majority's misplaced priorities during these difficult times for American families. As a result of the financial crisis in 2008, more than 7 million Americans lost their jobs, and more than 9 million Americans have faced foreclosure. In my small state of Delaware, 6,000 people filed for foreclosure last year, which is 3 times the norm. As Lieutenant Governor, I chaired a foreclosure prevention task force in Delaware, and we learned that the best way to help homeowners was through a combination of private and public sector efforts. It's just unbelievable to me that this House voted to end foreclosure prevention programs, which for thousands of families are the last chance to keep their homes. Let's remember that we are still recovering from the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression, and the housing market is still floundering. Allowing more families to lose their homes just makes things worse. So this debate is not just about helping individual families, as important as that is. It's also about strengthening the economic recovery now underway. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida rise? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge my colleagues to continue to focus on creating jobs and the economic recovery. I am very concerned with the reckless GOP spending proposal that will slash jobs all across the United States of America. And I want to give 2 examples that were highlighted by my local urban league that visited Washington yesterday from Pinellas County, or St. Petersburg, Florida. They said that the Republican spending proposal will actually cut 9,100 teachers and teacher aide and education jobs if it goes into effect. I think that's wrong. We shouldn't be slashing jobs. We should be fighting to create jobs. They also highlighted the fact that H.R. 1 will slash the Pell Grant for 9.4 million college students all across America. Their proposed cut is $845 per student. That is wrong. We must remain invested in education, our teachers, our students. We've got to fight for each and every job in the face of the GOP's reckless spending proposal and misguided priorities.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor a remarkable woman. This weekend, those who love and admire Elizabeth Carney will gather together in Mankato, Minnesota to celebrate her life. She passed away last Saturday at a very vibrant 96. She was a trailblazer in countless ways. She graduated with a degree in medical technology from the University of Minnesota in 1936. After her husband, Wynn, completed his residency in Rochester, Minnesota, they moved to Mankato, where they raised 5 children and became pillars of our community. The Mankato Free Press reported that she was a devoted mother who cherished family above all else, was so active in the community, was a friend, a mentor, and a role model. Her daughter Ann and her sons Win and Mike and their wives Jeanette and Jane are still an important force in our community. She founded the Women's Leadership Development Program at the YWCA, served on the Mankato Rehabilitation Center Board, started the Cultural Exchange Program at the University of Minnesota, Mankato, and served on so many countless organizations. The Free Press summed it up. Elizabeth was a personification of grace, humility, kindness, and generosity, and a day did not pass without her touching someone's life in a special way. Elizabeth will be deeply missed, not only by her family, but by so many of us in the community who admired her commitment to causes greater than herself. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise to commend the efforts of our former colleague Tony Hall, Reverend David Beckman, Reverend Jim Wallace, Mark Bittman, and more than 6,000 people across the country as they take part in a hunger fast to protest the draconian cuts to programs that affect the hungry and the most vulnerable in America and around the world. The Republican plan, H.R. 1, would decimate what is now being called the circle of protection, the programs that protect the hungry and the most vulnerable both here at home and around the world. I urge my colleagues to show that America doesn't turn its back on people in need, to have a heart, and to resist cutting these life-saving programs. Please go to www.hungerfast.org for more information, and I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record this fact sheet from Bread for the World on the circle of protection. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Revise them to extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, private sector employment went up by 200,000 people this month, but unemployment remains stubbornly high. A principal reason for this is the job cuts in the public sector. This past month, public sector jobs were lost at an annual rate of 250,000 people. These people also have mortgages to pay, college kids to educate, car payments to make, and the like. They matter to our economy. Over the last 2 years, more than 200,000 teachers have been laid off, while student enrollment has increased by 750,000. We're told that H.R. 1 would eliminate another 9,000 teacher jobs. In Detroit, classroom size has gone up to 60 students per classroom in middle school, the toughest years to maintain discipline and enhance knowledge. Now we're told we may have a compromise on H.R. 1 that will cut only 300,000 jobs, not 700,000 public sector jobs. It's inconsistent at best, hypocritical at worst, for the Republican majority in this House to suggest they care about jobs, while at the same time they're eliminating hundreds of thousands of them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
What purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky rise?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the cloud hanging over this chamber is the threat of a government shutdown. We are engaged in what is literally a life-or-death debate about our priorities as a country. And the Republican majority's reckless spending plan doesn't just betray our national values, it highlights their values. They're demanding cuts to financial aid for students and assistance to homeless veterans, or they'll shut the government down. They want to slash heating assistance for low-income seniors, or they'll shut the government down. They're even demanding we sacrifice the needs of police officers, firefighters, nurses, seniors, and even pregnant women. And on top of all that, they're fighting to protect billions in tax breaks for Wall Street and oil companies, or they'll shut the government down. In other words, they demand sacrifices from everyone except millionaires, billionaires, and their corporate benefactors. That's why I think we ought to call the reckless GOP spending plan good old payback. Mr. Speaker, we cannot let politics and corporate profits trump smart and compassionate policy and the well-being of our nation. I urge my colleagues to reject these demands and fight to create a government and an economy that works for all Americans, not just the wealthy few. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii rise?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've got to get a hold of reality. We've got to ask, what is it? What is it that we're doing when we're not able to come to a CR? Look at what we're telling the people. And worse than anything else, we are defeating the main purpose for which we're here. We're here to build public confidence. We're here to make people feel good that we know what we're doing and that there is a bright future for all of them. Instead, the majority is proposing yet another series of budget cuts. And cuts, yes, we must get our budget under control, but we must do it smartly. And somehow that message isn't getting through. Two economists said that the cuts are short-sighted. Budget cuts to human capital, our infrastructure, and the next generation of scientific and technological advances does nothing for us. Matter of fact, it's going to set us back. Mr. Speaker, please, what we need to do, what the majority needs to do, is to say, yes, cuts, but smart cuts. And let's work together towards smart cuts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
For permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as one of the previous members of the Democratic side talked about, tomorrow is April Fool's. April 1st, April Fool's. The Republicans would like to have everybody believe that a bill that just passed the House but has never passed the Senate, never been signed by the President, is going to become law. I mean, we all know from our civics class that just isn't what the Constitution says, but they'd like us to believe that. Now, that's a bad enough joke on America, but the real bad joke is what's in that bill, and what it does is we're finally starting to get this country on its feet economically. We're starting to make things in America again. Manufacturing is on the rise, but they'd like to see that cut. They want to cut our research into clean energy, which in Colorado, for every job that we have in research, there are 4 private sector jobs. They want to cut that. That's the bad joke that's coming up on April Fool's. The cuts that they ask really pull the rug right out from under the feet of America, and we've got to stop it. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand today to ask my colleagues to help American families and children. I join my good friend, Congressman Luis Gutierrez, on acknowledging the many children, the talented children that are in our schools that deserve the best education, along with all of our children who happen to have been in this country most of their life, but they're undocumented. They're called the DREAM Act children, the children who are our future engineers and doctors, teachers and train workers, bus workers, people who help build America. It is time now to support comprehensive immigration reform. It's time now to distinguish between the bad guys, who all of us want to see deported, versus these young children who are valedictorians and salutatorians, who are athletes, who are men and women in the United States military, who are seeking to be part of the pillars of this community. I want to join in standing alongside of these American families and children, not to break up families who are raising wonderful Americans, but yet are not status because of the way their families came to seek an opportunity. Comprehensive immigration reform is the answer, but we must protect the DREAM Act children. I yield back.
Pursuant to clause... Where? New Jersey. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my Republican colleagues made a pledge to America to develop a plan to create jobs in economic uncertainty and make America more competitive. Yet, to date, Republicans have not produced a single job-creating measure. In fact, they have done just the opposite. First-time jobless claims decreased by 5,000 last week, and the total number of people receiving benefits fell to its lowest level in 3 years. In February, job reports showed gains of 192,000 jobs, a drop in the unemployment rate to 8.9%, still ignoring the facts that the experts have said the need of their constituents and basic logic. Republicans continue to embrace a plan that would hamper our economic progress, depress our growth and development This misguiding, job-killing spending plan is estimated to eliminate 800,000 jobs, reduce economic growth by 2%. This is irresponsible, unacceptable, and I urge my Republican colleagues to abandon this job-killing spending campaign and adopt a reasonable agenda to support economic development and job growth. Thank you very much. Yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Pursuant to Clause 5A of 4A of Rule 10 in the order of the House of January the 5th, 2011, the Chair announces that the Speaker named the following members of the House to be available to serve on investigative subcommittees of the Committee on Ethics for the 112th Congress.
Mr. Bishop of Utah, Mrs. Blackburn of Tennessee, Mr. Crenshaw of Florida, Mr. Latham of Iowa, Mr. Simpson of Idaho, Mr. Walden of Oregon, Mr. Olson of Texas, Mr. Latta of Ohio, Mr. Griffin of Arkansas, Mr. Grimm of New York.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I request permission to address the House for 1 hour.
Does the gentleman request a point of personal privilege?
I request a point of personal privilege to address the House for 1 hour.
The Chair has been made aware of a valid basis for the gentleman's point of personal privilege. The gentleman from Ohio is now recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. The critical issue before this nation today is not Libyan democracy. It is American democracy. In the next hour, I will describe the dangers facing our own democracy. The principles of democracy across the globe are embodied in the UN Charter, conceived to end the scourge of war for all time. The hope that nations could turn their swords into plowshares reflects the timeless impulse of humanity for enduring peace, and with it, an enhanced opportunity to pursue happiness. We are not naive about the existence of forces in the world which work against peace and against human security. But it is our fervent wish that we shall never become like those whom we condemn as lawless and without scruples. For it is our duty as members of a democratic society to provide leadership by example, to not only articulate the highest standards, but to walk down the path to peace and justice with those standards as our constant companions. Our moral leadership in the world depends chiefly upon the might and light of truth, and not shock and awe and the ghastly glow of our 2,000-pound bombs. Mr. Speaker, our dear nation stands at a crossroads. The direction we take will determine not what kind of nation we are, but what kind of nation will we become? Will we become a nation which plots in secret to wage war? Will we become a nation which observes our Constitution only in matters of convenience? Will we become a nation which destroys the unity of the world community, which has been painstakingly pieced together from the ruins of World War II, a war which itself followed a war to end all wars? Now, once again, we stand poised at a precipice, forced to the edge,
by an administration which has thrown caution to the winds and our Constitution to the ground. It is abundantly clear from a careful reading of our Declaration of Independence that our nation was born from nothing less than the rebellion of the human spirit against the arrogance of power. More than 200 years ago, it was the awareness of the unchecked arrogance of George III that led our founders to carefully and deliberately balance our Constitution, articulating the rights of Congress in Article I as the primary check by our citizens against the dangers they foresaw for our republic. Our Constitution was derived from the human and political experience of our founders, who were aware of what happens when one person took it upon himself to assume rights and privileges which placed him above everyone else. But where, asked Tom Paine in his famous tract, Common Sense, where's the King of America? I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above and doth not make havoc of mankind like the royal of Britain. So far as we approve of monarchy, that in America the law is king. For as in absolute governments the king is law, so in free countries the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other, said Thomas Paine in Common Sense. The power to declare war is firmly and explicitly vested in the Congress of the United States under Article I, Section 8 of the Constitution. That is the law. The law is king. Let us make no mistake about it. Dropping 2,000-pound bombs and unleashing the massive firepower of our Air Force on the capital of a sovereign state is in fact an act of war, and no amount of legal acrobatics can make it otherwise. It is the arrogance of power which former Senator from Arkansas, J. William Fulbright, saw shrouded in the deceit which carried us into the abyss of another war in Vietnam. My generation was determined that we would never see another Vietnam. It was the awareness of the unchecked power and arrogance of the executive which led Congress to pass the War Powers Act. Congress, through the War Powers Act, provided the executive with an exception to unilaterally respond only when the nation was in actual or imminent danger to repel sudden attacks. Mr. Speaker, today we are in a constitutional crisis because we have an administration that has assumed for itself powers to wage war which are neither expressly defined nor implicit in the Constitution nor permitted under the War Powers Act. This is a challenge not just to the administration, but to this Congress itself. A president has no right to wrest that fundamental power from the Congress, and we have no right to cede it to him.
We, members of Congress, can no more absolve a president of his responsibility to obey this profound constitutional mandate than we can absolve ourselves of our failure to rise to the instant challenge to our Constitution that is before us today. We violate our sacred trust to the citizens of the United States and our oath to uphold the Constitution if we surrender this great responsibility and, through our inaction, acquiesce in another terrible war. We must courageously defend the oath we took to defend the Constitution of the United States, or we forfeit our right to participate in representative government. How can we pretend to hold other sovereigns to fundamental legal principles if we do not hold our own presidents to fundamental legal principles here at home? We are staring not only into the maelstrom of war in Libya, the code of behavior we are establishing sets a precedent for the potential of ever more violent conflicts in Syria, Iran, and the specter of the horrifying chaos of generalized war throughout the Middle East. Our continued occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan makes us more vulnerable, not less vulnerable, to being engulfed in this generalized war. In 2 years, we have moved from President Bush's doctrine of preventive war to President Obama's assertion of the right to go to war without even a pretext of a threat to the nation. This administration is now asserting the right to go to war because a nation may threaten force against those who have internally taken up arms against it. Keep in mind, our bombs began dropping even before the United Nations International Commission of Inquiry could verify allegations of murder of non-combatant civilians by the Gaddafi regime. The administration deliberately avoided coming to Congress and furthermore rejects the principle that Congress has any role in this matter. Yesterday, we learned that the administration would forge ahead with military action even if Congress passed a resolution constraining the mission. This is a clear and arrogant violation of our Constitution. Even a war launched ostensibly for humanitarian reasons is still a war, and only Congress can declare war. Mr. Speaker, we saw in the President's address to the nation on March 28th how mismatched elements are being hastily stitched together into a new war doctrine. Let's review them. Number one, an executive privilege to wage war. Number two, war based on verbal threats. Number three, humanitarian war. Number 4, preemptive war. Number 5, unilateral war. Number 6, war for regime change. Number 7, war against a nation whose government this administration determines to be illegitimate. Number 8, war authorized through the UN Security Council. Number 9, war authorized through NATO and the Arab League. And finally, war authorized by a rebel group against its despised government. But not a word about coming to the representatives of the people in this, the United States Congress, to make this decision. Mr. Speaker, at this very moment, thousands of sailors and Marines are headed to a position off the coast of Libya. The sons and daughters of our constituents willingly put their lives on the line for this country. We owe it to them to challenge a misguided and illegal doctrine which could put their lives in great danger. For we have an obligation to protect our men and women in uniform as they pledge to defend our nation. This administration's new war doctrine will not lead to peace, but to more war, and it will stretch even thinner our military. In 2007, the Center for American Progress released a report on the effects of war in Iraq and Afghanistan and the multiple deployments of our armed forces. The report cited a lack of military readiness. It cited high levels of post-traumatic stress and suicide. The report was released just before President Bush's surge in Iraq. Just 1 year after the surge in Afghanistan, and after 8 years of war in Iraq, the President commits an all-volunteer army to another war of choice. If the criteria for military intervention in another country is government-sponsored violence and instability, overcommitment of our military will be virtually inevitable. And as a result, our national security will be undermined. It is clear that the administration planned a war against Libya at least a month in advance. But why? The President cannot say that Libya is an imminent or actual threat to our nation. He cannot say that war against Libya is in our vital interest. He cannot say that Libya had the intention or capability of attacking the United States of America. He has not claimed that Libya has weapons of mass destruction to be used against us. We're told that our nation's role is limited, yet at the same time, it is being expanded. We've been told that the administration does not favor military regime change, but then they tell us the war cannot end until Gaddafi is no longer the leader. Further, 2 weeks earlier, the President signed a secret order for the CIA to assist the rebels who are trying to oust Gaddafi. We're told that the burdens of war in Libya would be shared by a coalition. But the United States is providing the bulk of the money, the armaments, and the organizational leadership. We know that the war has already cost our nation upwards of $600 million, and we're told that the long-term expenses could go much, much further. We're looking at spending additional billions of dollars in Libya at a time when we can't even take care of our people here at home. We're told that the President has legal authority for this war under United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973. But this resolution specifically does not authorize any ground elements. Furthermore, the administration exceeded the mandate of the resolution by providing the rebels with air cover. Thus, the war against Libya violated our Constitution and has even violated the very authority which the administration claimed was sufficient to take our country to war. We're told that the Gaddafi regime has been illegitimate for 4 decades. But we're not told that in 2003, the U.S. dropped sanctions against Libya. We're not told that Gaddafi, in an effort to ingratiate himself with the West in general, and with America specifically, accepted a market-based, led by the very harsh structural adjustment remedies of the IMF and the World Bank. This led to the wholesale privatization of state enterprises, contributing to unemployment in Libya rising to over 20%. CNN reported on December 19, 2003, that Libya acknowledged having a nuclear program, pledged to destroy weapons of mass destruction, and pledged to allow international inspections. This was a decision which President George W. Bush has praised, saying Gaddafi's actions, quote, made our country and our world safer, unquote. We're told that Gaddafi is in breach of the UN Security Council resolutions, but now our own Secretary of State is reportedly considering arming the rebels, an act which would be a breach of the United Nations Security Council resolution, which established an arms embargo. We are told we went to war at the request of and with the support of the Arab League. But the Secretary General of the Arab League, Amir Moussa, began asking questions immediately after the imposition of the no-fly zone, stating that what was happening in Libya, and I quote, differs from the aim of imposing a no-fly zone. What we want is the protection of civilians and not the shelling of civilians, unquote. Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, has also expressed concern over the protection of civilians even as Allied bombing continued during the International Conference on Libya in England this week, stating that the UN, and this is a quote, continues to receive deeply disturbing reports about the lack of protection of civilians, including various abuses of human rights by the parties to the conflict. He was alluding to possible human rights abuses by Libyan rebel forces. Even the Secretary General of NATO, an organization which the United States founded and generally controls, expressed concern, saying, quote, we're not in Libya to arm people, but to protect people, unquote. So I ask, is this truly a humanitarian intervention? What is humanitarian about providing to one side of the conflict the ability to wage war against the other side of a conflict, which will inevitably trigger a civil war, making all of Libya a graveyard? The administration has told us, incredibly, they don't really know who the rebels are, but they're considering arming them nonetheless. The fact that they're even thinking about arming these rebels makes one think the administration knows exactly who the rebels are. While a variety of individuals and institutions may comprise the so-called opposition in Libya, in fact, one of the most significant organizations is the National Front for the Salvation of Libya, along with its military arm, the Libyan National Army. It was the National Front's call for opposition to the Gaddafi regime in February, which was a catalyst of the conflict, which precipitated the humanitarian crisis which is now used to justify armed intervention. But I ask, Mr. Speaker, how spontaneous was this rebellion? The Congressional Research Service in 1987 analyzed the Libyan opposition. Here's what the Congressional Research Service wrote, and I quote, over 20 opposition groups exist outside Libya. The most important in 1987 was the National Front, formed in October 1981. This National Front claimed responsibility for a daring attack on Gaddafi's headquarters at Bab al-Azizia on May 8, 1984. Although the coup failed and Gaddafi escaped unscathed, dissident groups claimed that some 80 Libyans, Cubans, and East Germans perished, unquote. Significantly, the CRS cited various sources as early as 1984 which claimed, and I quote, the United States Central Intelligence Agency trained and supported the National Front before and after the May 8th operation. Now, by October 31st, 1996, according to a BBC translation of Al Hayat, an Arabic journal in London, a Colonel Khalifa Hiftar, who was leader of this Libyan National Liberation Army, the armed wing of the National Front, he was quoted as saying, "Force is the only effective method for dealing with Gaddafi." Now follow me to March 26, 2011. The McClatchy newspapers reported, and I quote, "The new leader of Libya's opposition military left for Libya 2 weeks ago," unquote. Apparently, around the same time, the President signed the covert operations order, and I'm making that observation. The new leader spent the past 2 decades of his life in Libya? No. In suburban Virginia, where he had no visible means of support. His name, Colonel Khalifa Hiftar. Now, one wonders when he planned his trip and who is his travel agency. Congress needs to determine whether the United States, through previous covert support of the armed insurrection driven by the American-created National Front, potentially helped create the humanitarian crisis that was used to justify military intervention. We need to ask the question. If we really want to understand how our constitutional prerogative for determining war and peace has been preempted by this administration, it is important that Congress fully considered relevant events which may relate directly to the attack on Libya. Consider this, Mr. Speaker. On November 2nd, 2011, France and Great Britain signed a mutual defense treaty, which included joint participation in Southern Mistral, a series of war games outlined in the bilateral agreement and surprisingly documented on a joint military website established by France and Great Britain. Southern Mistral involved a long-range conventional air attack called Southern Storm against a dictatorship in a fictitious southern country called Southland in response to a pretend attack. The joint military airstrike was authorized by a pretend United Nations Security Council resolution. The composite air operations were planned, and this is the war games, for the period of March 21st through 25th, 2011. On March 20th, 2011, the United States joined France and Great Britain in an air attack against Libya, pursuant to UN Security Council Resolution 1973. So the questions arise, Mr. Speaker, have the scheduled war games simply been postponed, or are they actually underway after months and months of planning under the name of Operation Odyssey Dawn? Were opposition forces in Libya informed by the U.S., the U.K., or France about the existence of these war games, which may have encouraged them to actions leading to greater repression and a humanitarian crisis? In short, was this war against Gaddafi's Libya planned, or was it a spontaneous response to the great suffering which Gaddafi was visiting upon his opposition? Congress hasn't even considered this possibility. NATO, which has now taken over enforcement of the no-fly zone, has morphed from an organization which pledged mutual support to defend North Atlantic states from aggression. They've moved from that to military operations reaching from Libya to the Chinese border in Afghanistan, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We need to know, and we need to ask, what role French Air Force General Abriel and current Supreme Allied Commander of NATO for Transformation may have played in the development of Operation Southern Storm and in discussions with the U.S. in the expansion of the UN mandate into a NATO operation. What has been the role of the U.S. African Command and Central Command in discussions leading up to this conflict? What did the administration know, and when did they know it? The United Nations Security Council process is at risk when its members are not fully informed of all the facts when they authorize a military operation. It is at risk from NATO, which is usurping its mandate, the UN mandate, without the specific authorization of UN Security Council Resolution 1973. Now, the United States pays 25% of the military expense of NATO, and NATO may be participating in the expansion in exceeding the UN mandate. The United Nations relies not only on moral authority, but on the moral cooperation of its member nations. If America exceeds its legal authority and determines to redefine international law, we journey away from an international moral order and into the amorality of power politics, where the rule of force trumps the rule of law. What are the fundamental principles at stake in America today? First and foremost is our system of checks and balances built into the Constitution to ensure that important decisions of state are developed through mutual respect and shared responsibility in order to ensure that collective knowledge, indeed the collective wisdom of the people, is brought to bear. Two former Secretaries of State, James Baker and Warren Christopher, have spoken jointly to the, quote, importance of meaningful consultation between the President and Congress before the nation is committed to war, unquote. Our nation has an inherent right to defend itself and a solemn obligation to defend the Constitution. From the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam to the allegations of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, we've learned from bitter experience that the determination to go to war must be based on verifiable facts carefully considered. Finally, civilian deaths are always to be regretted. But we must understand from our own Civil War more than 150 years ago that nations must resolve their own conflicts and shape their own destiny internally. However horrible these internal conflicts may be, these local conflicts can become even more dreadful if armed intervention in a civil war results in the internationalization of that conflict. The belief that war is inevitable makes of war a self-fulfilling prophecy. The United States, in this new and complex world, racked with great movements of masses to transform their own government, must itself be open to transformation, away from intervention, away from trying to determine the leadership of other nations, away from covert operations to manipulate events, and towards a rendezvous with those great principles of self-determination which gave birth to our nation. In a world which is interconnected and interdependent, in a world which cries out for human unity, we must call upon the wisdom of our namesake, our founder, George Washington, to guide us in the days ahead. He said, "The Constitution vests the power of declaring war in Congress. Therefore, no offensive expedition of importance can be undertaken until after they shall have deliberated upon the subject and authorized such measure." Unquote. Washington. Washington, whose portrait faces us every day as we deliberate, also had a wish for the future America. He said, "My wish is to see this plague of mankind, war, banished from the earth." I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time.